Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Okay, so I'm declaring today Feel Good Friday, because I got a couple of really good feel-good stories I want to share with my followers. Okay, so one night I'm searching Reverb like I'm always doing. I happened to come across a listing down here. It read Gibson DT Chandler truss rod cover, 1970s brass. And then lo and behold, oh, Jack's Guitarcheology. We've actually been buying a lot of stuff from this guy lately. You know, all these worthless, weird Gibson memorabilias, USBs, and disc drives. Yeah, it came from this guy because he lives close to Nashville and occasionally guys are selling stuff and he gets some cool items. So I'm looking at this, UJDT Chandler, what's going on here? Because brass truss rod covers were highly used in the late 70s and early 80s. Like, for example, the 50th anniversary Les Paul had a brass truss rod cover that looked like this one. These guitars themselves were very fancy, so having a brass truss rod cover on top of a brass nut, it just made sense. Other models such as the ES Artist and Les Paul Artist also shared something similar. So we flipped through the rest of the photos and it's like, okay, kind of cool. What's his description? He says it's a vintage new old stock Gibson brass truss rod cover from the 80s and it was custom inscribed for a DT Chandler. My e-commerce assistant and I could not track down who DT Chandler is, so if it's like your grandpa or something, be sure to let us know. It's like, no, that's Dennis Chandler. He's like famous. However, I wouldn't expect everybody to know his name because he's not like a famous artist or anything. He worked for Gibson back in the day. Throughout his time of working with Gibson, he was a district manager. He was also a regional sales manager. It just kind of depends when you were talking to him. But, 78 to 83. The perfect 5-year spread of all of Gibson's best models of the 70s and 80s. And let me tell you, Dennis has some really good stories. I always love popping on the phone with him because he can tell you some interesting things. So instantly, I'm messaging Dennis because I knew D in Chandler matched him, but I don't know his middle name, so who knows? It could have been for anybody. But I was curious if maybe he would have a story to share if nothing else. And his candid responses, I worked for Gibson from 78 to 83. Who else would it be? So I felt really good here because I linked Jack up with the guy whose name is on it, and it only took a couple of seconds. It's amazing the power of reverb, right? It only takes one guy to see something as obscure as this and be able to know what it was for. However, I would have never have known the story behind this had this not have ever happened. So apparently this was supposed to say built for DT Chandler. The story behind this particular truss rod cover is it was given out as like a sales award or maybe like some sort of a Christmas present. I'm not entirely too sure. The phone was kind of breaking up when we were talking. But basically they would make these and hand them out to their sales managers and other people high up within the company. Just like a special thank you gift. So he actually got one of these that said built for DT Chandler. And he's had it on an old ES355 for quite some time, he said. However, this particular one, he says, had to have been like a factory embossing error. When they were stamping it out, something was not right here because you can see the B right here just kind of got cut off and then the U is like way too low and then this got stashed away. So I linked Jack and Dennis up hoping that they were gonna come to a deal and make something happen. Because let's face it, if your name is on it, you're not gonna want to pay $75 unless you're custom ordering it. I was just gonna buy it for him. So I checked up on him because I had saw the listing ended. I was like, did Dennis get this? And that's when we were able to confirm that yes, indeed, it did make it back, and that's how I got the rest of the tail. Jack ended up selling it to him for like $5 or $10, which was a really solid move on his part. So he was wondering, where's it been these past 40 years? And I'm not sure how much Jack actually wants me to share with you, but he's got a whole bunch of vintage parts that he says he got from the Hutch lot, which I'm assuming means Jim Hutchins? The guy really famous for the USA map guitar. This was the last one he built before he left Gibson in 2003. So now you're probably curious, what is Dennis gonna do with this? He told me that he has a Lonnie Mac Flying V. It's like his favorite Flying V because he was buddies with Lonnie and still is friends with his family. But at one point in time, there was one on Reverb that somebody had intentionally relicked and it turned out awful. So he was thinking, if I can get this for the right price, and he ends up getting it and he sends it back to Gibson, has them refinish it in a natural finish. But that was quite some time ago, but that's what he's going to put this new truss rod cover on. But Dennis was actually able to share a few other cool custom brass belt buckles that were also made for him during this time. I mean, check this thing out. Gibson logo with their 60s, 70s splash banner, I don't know, whatever you call it. But then pressed in right there with his name, and then he's got another one down here. I mean, these are all so nice and sparkly, shiny, clean yet. And it makes sense because there was a brass company in Kalamazoo at the time where Gibson had a factory. It looks like it was called Ampersand Brass. So these look a little bit different from the other belt buckles like we saw on the 25 50th anniversary guitars or the other like RD belt buckles or other various Gibson ones. But it's cool to see like employee favors, I guess you could say, with this. But now I've got one other cool story to share with you guys. So I recently received a private help session about a Gibson Super V. Now, we were just talking about this really crazy flying V a couple of nights ago, so I was thinking, oh my goodness, is this some weird flying V I've never heard of? I am so excited. Because he says, hey there, I'm from Australia. I only recently discovered your channel, but I've been enjoying it tremendously. So he recently inherited this guitar from his grandfather, who is quite the prolific Australian jazz musician, but he doesn't really know anything about it. So he's looking for some information, but there's photos locked behind a zip folder. Now, unfortunately, for internet safety reasons, I can't open these zip folders. I can't download them to get the photos. So I had to ask him to send them in multiple emails and whatnot. So the whole day I'm thinking, what kind of crazy flying V is out there? Then he sends me these photos and it's like, oh, that Super V. Okay. So this ties in with Feel Good Friday because he inherited it from his grandfather and he doesn't just want to sell it. He wants to know how much it's worth for like insurance purposes, but he deeply treasures it and he just wanted to know more about it. Now granted, I'm not the foremost expert when it comes to these crazy jazz guitars. I mean, we've documented a couple on the show from like DeKisto, and we just recently documented that LeGrand model, which is a fantastic super high-end jazz box. But what you need to know when it comes to Gibson high-end jazz guitars is the L5 is the Mac Daddy staple. If you've got an L5, all the other jazz cats are jealous of you. That's the way I see it. There's a couple of more higher end ornamental models, like you could say like the Super 400 or get as crazy as like the Dragon 400. But generally speaking, the L5 is great. So the Super 400 apparently has a slightly larger body than the L5 as well. So what the Super V is a weird love child between the Super 400 and the L5 that has all the cosmetic attributes of the Super 400. So we're talking things like the big old Gibson custom headstock and where the name Super 400 inlay comes from, having the dashed blocks. But we have the regular body size of the Gibson L5. So it's kind of an interesting quirky model. The initial run lasted from 1978 and lasted all the way until about 1985. Now there's infrequent reissues, but generally speaking, you don't hear the Super V too often. But I was actually able to find an old spec sheet, like a dealer pamphlet. So it's the carved spruce top. That's what makes these Archtop guitars higher end than the ES style instruments. Those are like plywood laminated together, formed into what they're supposed to be. These are custom carved tops that are tuned to a certain pitch to make them as acoustically resonant and projecting as humanly possible. That's why they're so expensive. A lot of hand labor. But then what's kind of cool here is the carved maple back with solid maple matching rims. We've got the graceful Venetian cutaway. That's what this is. It's kind of like what a Les Paul has, whereas the Florentine is the big sharp pointy one that pokes you. They do make Florentine Les Pauls in case you're interested. Check out this review and demo. Then they talk about the binding and the bound F-holes. That's a big deal on Gibson territory. And you get the ebony fretboard with your ebony bridge. But the biggest thing you need to know is the length is 21 inches with a width of 17 with a depth of 3 1/4. So we've got the super fancy 5-ply maple construction neck with a pretty regular nut width, I would say, and all your other good fancy stuff, but 20 frets and a 25.5-inch scale length. That's pretty important to note. And here's what it looked like at the front of that. Super V CES. So you might look at this, and then you might look at that and go, you sure you know what you're talking about, Trogly? Okay. Hold on to that thought for a second. Well, we'll explain it later, but there were two different models. So first we need to figure out what on earth is this for him. So we flip through all of his photos and we can see a serial number here. 026, looks like a 904, maybe 1. Plug that into an online calculator, that doesn't give you anything. That's because we're missing a digit here. It's hiding underneath our tuner. The only thing that would make sense is a 7. So this is a 1979 made on January 26th. And it was a Kalamazoo built guitar and then 40 something in production. So next he was wanting to know, is it modified? Is anything aftermarket on it? To which I said, yes, the nut has definitely been replaced. It looks like a bone replacement, so it makes sense. And then if you zoom in right here, we do not have any fret nibs. So that means this has been refretted. And with as much as his grandpa probably played this guitar, it makes sense that it might have been refretted, especially if the nut had been replaced. However, looking over the rest of the guitar, it appears to be original. So next he was asking, what's going on with the controls under the pick guard? And this is what he's talking about right here. We've got these weird wheels. Okay, so those are still potentiometers. They're just hidden underneath the pick guard because this is a floating pickup model. So what we saw over here, the Super V CES, this version has actual controls in the guitar. You've got a toggle switch, strangely, all the way up there, not quite centered. You'd think they'd put it right there, but whatever. And you got 2 humbuckers. It's a modern day jazz guitar is the way I look at it. Whereas this guy is like your old-timey jazz guy. He wants the mini humbucker floating. So that told me a lot about his grandpa just right there. He's one of the OGs. So sometimes these floating pickups have a bracket that's secured to the side of the neck. Other times it's just like a bracket to the pick guard. There's a lot of ways to do it, but there's nothing on your soundboard making it dampen, I think is the whole idea behind this. And this model back in the day came as the CES and the BJB model, and BJB refers to the name of this pickup. That helps us identify it even further. And then he was kind of looking for the approximate current value, even though he doesn't want to sell it. And I told him it's probably a ballpark of between 5,000 to 6,000. Reverb doesn't have any documented sales, publicly documented online without using their app anyway. But I saw a couple completed sales between like 6,000 and 8,500. These fancy jazz Archtop guitars don't necessarily sell fast, but they do command premium prices. I mean, he was later telling me the action's really high on this. It's not that comfortable to play, so he needs at least a professional setup, or maybe it needs a neck reset. It's kind of hard to evaluate this, but you know, at the bare minimum, if you're just trying to insure it, I would definitely go for 6,000. But get this, he actually has the original receipt yet. Well, it might not be the receipt from the actual shop, but it's at least the importer to Australia. So there it is, Gibson Super V BJB color ASB. He was confused what ASB stands for, and that's Antique Sunburst, just like the Spotlight Specials. So it looks like he paid somewhere around 2,600 Australian dollars, likely sometime in the early 80s would be my guess. And next he wanted my opinion on how he should restore this guitar, because it's seen a lot of action, it's got nicks and dings. Since it's been in Queensland, apparently it's very humid there, and he's worried about mold on the guitar. And here's what I thought he was talking about, the BJB pickup. The natural greening when you've got salt in the air and it's being played, I mean, that's not a big deal. That's not mold, it's just oxidization. It can be cleaned off, but you gotta be really careful what product you use, because a lot of times you just end up taking the gold off too. But here's my advice for him and anybody doing a restoration on a guitar that looks like the one we're talking about today, that just has honest play wear. Don't touch it. You're gonna hurt the value even more making it look perfect than if you just would have let it be alone and had a couple of nicks and dings on the headstock. Now, if you've got like a big eyesore on the top, then maybe, just maybe. But this one, I told him, take it to a professional. Have it completely set up to make sure that there's no issues with the neck, and so you have a baseline of what you know the guitar can be playability-wise. Have them polish it up, or you polish it up, and just enjoy it for what it is. It's a family heirloom, and it's a fantastic one at that. I don't know if he plays or not, but he should if he's got a jazz box like this. So Alexander, I hope you enjoy that magnificent beast of a Super V. All right, Troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed our feel-good stories this week. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care.